Hi, my name is Alice, and I will be facilitating Module 3 of this training. In this section, we take a more detailed look at practical approaches to meeting the expectations outlined in Module 2, including actions and questions to consider at all stages of operating a grievance mechanism. First, let's examine how a grievance mechanism works. For this, it's useful to think about the process in 3 steps. The process begins when the mechanism is designed and developed. Implementation includes receiving a complaint, assessing and investigating the complaint, and working toward remediation and resolution of the complaint. And finally, an important part of the process is ongoing revision of the mechanism to reduce potential bias, gaps, and weaknesses, or to adapt to changing business environments. In the following sections, we will break down each of these phases to demonstrate exactly how to implement these step by step and to provide key action items and questions to consider. International standards, including the UN Guiding Principles Effectiveness Criteria, can provide guidance on how to ensure a grievance mechanism is effective at each stage of the process. The effectiveness criteria are a key starting point for developing or improving a grievance mechanism. To meet these criteria, a grievance mechanism must be 1. Legitimate, which means it has the trust of different stakeholders and handles grievances in a fair way. This includes ensuring that grievance mechanisms have a sufficient degree of independence from day-to-day business activities. 2. Accessible, which means that different stakeholder groups know that it exists and are able to use it. For example, it must be available in the languages of the stakeholders it intends to serve. Note that structural, socio-cultural, and economic barriers may prevent population subgroups, such as ethnic or racial minorities, women, or gender minorities, from bringing complaints, and you should identify measures to overcome these barriers, such as direct community engagement. 3. Predictable, by providing the public with a clear and known grievance mechanism, procedure, or process. 4. Equitable, by ensuring that stakeholders have access to sources of information, advice, and expertise needed to engage in the grievance mechanism process. Transparent, which means stakeholders are informed about a complaint's progress. 6. Rights compatible, by ensuring that outcomes and remedies align with international human rights standards. 7. A source of continuous learning, which means the process is improved upon based on lessons learned. And 8. Based on engagement and dialogue, which means consulting stakeholder groups and using their input to address and resolve grievances and improve the grievance mechanism process. Following the guidance of this training will help to align a grievance mechanism with these standards. Let's dive into the first step in the process, which is to design and develop a grievance mechanism. Here we have the steps needed to develop a grievance mechanism, including engaging internal and external stakeholders, creating clear and comprehensive processes, and communicating and promoting the grievance mechanism to stakeholders. Let's break down each of these steps. First, to engage internal and external stakeholders, you should map potential rights holders. This will include identifying who is impacted by your business operations, including employees, contract workers, and community members. Engage rights holders in designing the grievance mechanism. For example, you may choose to hold focus groups with different types of rights holders, such as workers, or participate in community-driven mechanisms that are created by the affected populations and organizations themselves. When consulting rights holders, you should ensure that you consider geographic, gender-related, economic, and educational barriers to information access, and gain senior-level buy-in for the mechanism to ensure it has internal authority and support. This may include a presentation of the grievance mechanism at an executive and/or a board meeting, and having a clear executive sponsor. To ensure the process aligns with international standards, consider the following questions. Which stakeholders are impacted by your business activities and operations? Which stakeholder groups should be involved in the design of the grievance mechanism? Within these groups, who should be consulted? Have you considered specific country and cultural contexts? And which senior leaders should be consulted about the mechanism's design and rollout? Let's take a closer look at which rights holders may be impacted by key business activities. The type and the severity of impacts will vary between and within each rights holder group. It is important to remember that rights holders may have different levels of education, linguistic abilities, and knowledge of a company, which may impact how comfortable they feel raising a complaint. Therefore, understanding the different audiences for whom the grievance mechanism is intended to serve is critical. These groups may include employees, indirect employees, supply chain workers, local community members, and clients or consumers. Once stakeholders have been engaged, it is time to create clear and comprehensive processes and policies for the grievance mechanism. To do so, you can develop a policy and process for each phase, including complaint submission, investigation, resolution, and communicating outcomes. Establish clear responsibilities among staff, and provide training to all relevant staff on how to manage the process. To establish best practices, consider the following questions. Can concerns be raised anonymously? Is your system sufficiently accessible to rights holders? Does it take into account language, gender, financial barriers, and security issues, for example? Is there a written document which outlines the process for handling a complaint? Which teams are involved in receiving and handling the complaint? And have they received the appropriate information and training? Let's take a closer look at what elements should be outlined in a grievance mechanism policy or procedure. This should include information on the process to log a complaint submission, the investigation process and resolution, including who is responsible for receiving and registering complaints and grievances, how to record complaints, and indicative timeframes for the various phases. Guidance on how to engage with stakeholders during the investigation and resolution of the case, commitment to transparency and non-retaliation, commitment to protect rights holder anonymity and confidentiality, and information on how some matters may be escalated and when to refer to an independent process where necessary. You should also aim to provide information on the appeals process, how you will ensure that the process is sensitive to gender and cultural aspects, and how the process will apply to contractors and other agents acting on the organization's behalf. The third step in developing a grievance mechanism includes consistent and effective communication. You should promote the grievance mechanism publicly and empower rights holders to use the mechanism. Also consider the following questions. Do you provide information about the grievance mechanism in relevant workplaces, company websites, and to the community? Are all staff trained on how to raise a complaint and use the grievance mechanism? And do you communicate about grievance mechanisms in a way that is accessible to different stakeholders? Let's take a closer look at which platforms can be used to communicate publicly about the grievance mechanism. You may raise awareness among direct and indirect employees on your grievance mechanism in staff trainings, on posters on work sites and offices, or send a copy of the relevant policy to employees on an annual basis. To ensure that supply chain workers can access a grievance mechanism, you may discuss its availability at regular meetings with your suppliers. Local community members may be made aware of the channel via community meetings or tech platforms such as WhatsApp, WeChat, or Facebook. For clients and customers, public information on grievance mechanisms on your company website and annual reports is a good way to communicate about your processes and outcomes. Multiple platforms can and should be used to cater for the different rights holders who may use it. Businesses should be transparent with rights holders, including local communities, and encourage direct dialogue to avoid the escalation of issues. So let's take a look at an example of a fictitious company called Futura Metals, a metal processing business, which has operations in India, Turkey, and the United States. It does not currently have a grievance mechanism, but it has received questions from several investors and clients about how concerns can be reported. After discussion with the legal, sustainability, and HR departments, the CEO of Futura Metals gives the go-ahead to create a company grievance mechanism. In the first year, it will create an employee-facing channel, which will then be rolled out to the community. Let's take a look at what Futura Metals does to ensure that it creates a robust grievance channel. It first decides who will lead the process of designing and implementing the grievance mechanism. Patricia, the head of sustainability, will have general oversight for the process, with the support of the legal and human resources teams. A small task force is created to monitor the implementation. After conducting a stakeholder mapping, Futura Metals engages with internal and external stakeholders. Patricia organizes a focus group with functions across departments at the corporate level, including the head of legal, human resources, and sustainability. She also organizes a focus group with employees in each of its 3 different countries of operations to understand potential barriers to accessing grievance mechanisms, and holds discussions with human resources functions in each of these 3 locations. Patricia also contacts sustainability leads at several other companies to understand the common challenges they have experienced. Once different views have been collected, she organizes a briefing session for the executive. The next step is for Patricia to develop the grievance mechanism, policy, and process. She solicits input on the first draft from the task force and each of the focus groups of employees who were initially consulted. Once the policy is finalized, Patricia organizes an all-staff training in each of the geographies of operation to explain the purpose of the grievance mechanism and how it can be used. She also designs posters for all the worksites translated into the appropriate language. Finally, she ensures that information about the grievance mechanism is published on the company website in local languages. Once the grievance mechanism has been designed and developed, whether for employees or external stakeholders, it's time to implement and run the channel. Let's break down what that looks like in practice. Running a grievance mechanism includes receiving complaints, investigating the complaint, and then working towards resolution and remediation. To receive complaints, ensure that these can be raised through several different channels. Confirm with the complainant that the report has been received and clarify the next steps and timeline for handling the concern. This should be consistent with the information contained in your grievance mechanism policy and procedure. Make sure that where needed, women, marginalised groups and minorities are provided with assistance in complaint making, such as funding additional resources or enabling access to independent advice. Additionally, consider these questions. Do relevant staff speak the appropriate language to engage with users, and are the translation services available? Is a detailed explanation of each step of the process available to rights holders? Is notification that the complaint has been received provided to the complainant within at least 24 hours? And is there an independent process for complex issues or issue escalation? Let's take a closer look at the different channels that can be used to report grievances. Some examples of company channels include in-person communication, for example, via line managers, career managers, staff in the human resources department, or community liaison officers, or at staff or community meetings. A phone number or hotline, including a whistleblowing or ethics platform. An online form, which is available on the company internal and external website. An email, or community tech platforms, including Facebook, WeChat, or WhatsApp. It is important to note that the channels used may differ depending on whether complaints are raised at the corporate or field level. Assessing and investigating all complaints received by the mechanism is a critical part of the process. This includes determining the severity of the complaint and escalating issues where necessary, and leveraging external expertise where needed, for example, to help understand specific contexts of vulnerable groups such as cultural and national backgrounds, or to bring knowledge on specific issues such as sexual harassment or forced labour. Additionally, consider these questions. Is there a consistent approach to categorising grievances? Are clear timelines and milestones established to assess and investigate the claim, and are these communicated to the complainant? Do you provide regular updates about the status of the case proactively and consistently to the complainant? Is a case manager assigned to oversee the investigation and communicate with the complainant? And do you have processes to ensure that any bias in the investigation is accounted for and addressed? Let's take a closer look at who may need to be involved in investigating a complaint. Remember that the process should be independent from day-to-day business activities, which will include ensuring that staff linked to the complaint are not involved in the investigation phase. These groups may include the Human Resources Department or lead, Legal Department, Sustainability leads, supervisors, executive leaders, and external advisors as needed for, especially with complex grievances. Following the investigation, work to find a resolution to the complaint. While in some cases financial compensation may be appropriate, in other instances it will be about changing a process or behaviour to stop the harm from occurring. To do so, seek input from the complainant about appropriate remedy, for example, whether compensation, medical, psychological, legal, and/or social services are needed. If needed, partner with trusted local stakeholders who can assist you in providing support, like health services, and monitor outcomes of the process after the case closes. Additionally, consider the following questions. Is there a process to consider restitution, rehabilitation, compensation, satisfaction, and non-repetition? Are outcomes of the case clearly communicated to the complainant in appropriate ways? Do you have a process to engage with the complainant to determine whether they are satisfied with the remedy? And do you have a process for either party to seek third-party review or appeal the assessment of the outcome? Providing remedy is a crucial part of a grievance process. When providing remedy, the affected person should be at the centre of the entire remediation process. This means that remedies should be responsive to the specific experiences and expectations of the individual and should be determined according to their unique needs. Additionally, affected persons should have access to a range of remedies and should have no fear of retaliation of raising a grievance. Elements of effective remedy include restitution, or restoring the affected person to the extent possible to the original position before the abuses occurred. Compensation, which includes providing money or other trade-offs for the cost of the harm. Rehabilitation, which includes providing medical, psychological, legal, and social services to restore the affected person. Satisfaction, which refers to a business ceasing the violation, acknowledging the harm, disclosing the truth, providing an apology, and sanctioning those responsible. And providing a guarantee of non-repetition, through which businesses address or change policies and procedures to prevent future harms or take disciplinary action. So let's return to our case study example. Now that the grievance mechanism is up and running, Futura Metals receives its first complaint via the company hotline from Ishan, a contract worker who carries out maintenance. He claims that he has not received his wage for 8 weeks. Let's take a look at the steps that Futura Metal team takes to handle the grievance. First, the team let Ishan know within 24 hours that the complaint has been received and outline next steps. In line with the company policy, Futura Metals tells Ishan that they will investigate the claim, provide a response within 3 working weeks, and give him a copy of the company grievance mechanism policy. It is decided that the procurement lead in India, Panal, will lead the investigation. Panal consults another worker, Mohammed, employed by the same maintenance company, to ask whether he has received this month and last month's wages. He says that he has not. The procurement team organises a meeting with the maintenance company to understand whether wages have been paid to their employees and ask to see last month's payslips. The company explains that they are still waiting for the invoice of their biggest client and have not been able to pay last month's wages to their staff. After the meeting, Panal provides an update to Ishan and Mohammed and seeks their view on appropriate remediation. She asks them if they have incurred any debt. They confirm that they have not. Panal goes back to the maintenance company and agrees that they should pay Ishan and Mohammed's wages in the next 48 hours and provide a guarantee of non-repetition. Panal also lets the company know that she will be monitoring payment of wages going forward. Panal lets Ishan and Mohammed know the outcome of the investigation and tells them to escalate any potential issue with the maintenance company directly with her in the future. Once a grievance mechanism is up and running, it should be reviewed and revised periodically and regularly. A grievance mechanism should also be revised in the case of a significant event such as a merger or acquisition or an identified material breach of the mechanism. The steps to revising a grievance mechanism include seeking feedback from stakeholders on the mechanism and associated procedures and revising the mechanism based on the feedback. Additionally, you should seek to identify and address the root causes of grievances to prevent future harms. This should be ongoing and a key consideration at the development, implementation, and revision phase. To seek feedback, a business can regularly engage with stakeholders, monitor outcomes of the grievance process, and track number of cases and resolutions, and where possible, report publicly on these. For example, you could organise a focus group session on a yearly basis with employees involved in handling grievances, employees that have used the channel over the past year, or seek an external expert to review the grievance mechanism process and its effectiveness. Additionally, consider keeping proper records, such as databases on frequency, patterns, and causes of grievances, which can be disaggregated to show patterns of use by different genders and stakeholder groups, and assist with the identification of barriers to access and their causes. Consider these questions. Is there a process to solicit feedback from grievance mechanism users? Is feedback solicited on the grievance procedure and process, as well as case outcomes? And are processes in place to incorporate feedback from the most vulnerable stakeholders in the population? To seek feedback, a business can review the grievance mechanism at least every 5 years or more frequently if required by law. Review the grievance mechanism after any changes to the business that may change risks, such as a merger or acquisition, or upon any indication of a control gap in the process. Additionally, consider these questions. Is there a process to assess how outcomes are implemented? A process is in place to ensure that any bias in the mechanism is accounted for and addressed. Are findings of the process, including challenges and lessons learned, shared with peer companies to facilitate industry learnings? And do you report externally on the types of grievances received and actions taken in response? Let's take a closer look at how you can report externally on grievance mechanisms. Communicating externally about human rights impacts is a basic expectation of the guiding principles. Reporting helps companies identify and understand risks, improve management, and build trust with stakeholders. Information about your grievance mechanism can be included as part of an annual report, a sustainability report, a human rights report, and/or on your company website. Reports can include details about the number and types of cases received, relevant policies and procedures, examples of case resolutions, and efforts to strengthen the effectiveness of the current systems. Remember that the information should be provided in a way that is accessible to its intended audience and in a way that allows comparison of progress over time. When designing, implementing, and improving your grievance mechanisms, you should work to prevent future harms by identifying and addressing root causes. To do so, you can examine individual grievances to identify the root causes of complaints, and revise internal policies or practices where needed to prevent future harms. Regularly revising your grievance mechanism in light of the complaints received will help to address root causes. Additionally, consider the following questions. Do you have a process to assess why grievances occurred? Do you have a process to track and analyse patterns of grievances and a related process to mitigate and prevent future harm? Do you have a process to revise policies or practices that may have contributed to or allowed the harms to occur? And do you have a process to publish aggregate findings and outcomes of grievances? Let's return to our case study for one final time. Futura Metals has had its grievance mechanism and process in place for a year. Now is the time for Patricia to check it is working properly. So what actions does she take? Patricia reviews the number of grievances received over the year and finds that 8 complaints related to wages, health and safety, and sexual harassment have been received. She notes that no grievances have been raised in Turkey. Patricia contacts the individuals who raised complaints to understand how the process can be improved. One participant says that his manager did not know that the grievance mechanism existed, and she could have been better informed. Patricia also contacts the human resources head in Turkey to understand potential barriers to raising concerns. One potential obstacle is identified: the fact that the person who was supposed to deliver the grievance mechanism training left the company before the session took place. Patricia decides on an improvement plan, which includes a targeted training on grievance mechanisms for all managers and a training for staff and contractors located in Turkey. She also makes a detailed plan on how to roll out the mechanism to local communities. We have now almost reached the end of our training on grievance mechanisms. As a result of the training, you should now be able to describe the purpose and benefits of a grievance mechanism, understand international standards and requirements on grievance mechanisms, and be equipped with the practical approaches and tools to establish, improve, and run a grievance mechanism. If you want to learn more about grievance mechanisms, there are a number of great resources to guide you through developing, implementing, and improving your own channel. These include the International Council on Mining and Minerals Handling and Resolving Local Level Concerns and Grievances. You should also consult the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and the standards developed by the Aluminium Stewardship Initiative, the Copper Mark, and the Responsible Minerals Initiative. Remember that establishing an effective grievance mechanism requires time, cross-departmental collaboration, transparency, and continuous improvement. You will need to get input internally and externally, work with others, and review and revise your current process. Doing so will help your company to more effectively navigate human rights challenges ahead. Good luck, and thank you for joining the training.